Why did the room fall silent the moment she walked in? No one turned their head, no one greeted her, but the air shifted all the same. The scrape of chair legs against the floor, the clipped shuffle of boots, the sound of maps being folded, all of it seemed to carry an unspoken question. Why is she here? She stood in the doorway, hands behind her back, the olive-green shirt clinging to her shoulders, still damp from the morning run. Dust clung to her boots. Her hair was tied back in a quick knot, though strands escaped and curled against her temple. Her eyes flicked across the table, the men, the officers, the veterans who had carved their names into missions she'd only read about. She wasn't supposed to be at this briefing. Not yet. Not with her record. Not with the doubts they had about her. But she was here. She took the only empty chair. The wooden legs groaned, and the silence cracked just enough for the colonel's voice to cut through. This mission isn't one you come back from clean, if you come back at all. The map spread before them was scarred with red lines, circles, and names scratched like wounds. A canyon road, a bridge long since abandoned, an enemy camp buried in the dust. It was routine, some might say. Another extraction. Another walk into hell, but routine didn't explain the urgency in his voice. Routine didn't explain the way he avoided looking at her when he spoke. Her fingers traced the edge of the map. She knew this place. She had grown up only 3 towns away. That wasn't in her file. She hadn't told them, not yet. Intel says they're holding 2 of ours, the colonel went on. Pilots, down 3 nights ago, alive for now. His voice tightened on those last 2 words, and something in her chest pulled like a rope being wound too tight. Nobody noticed the way she drew in a breath, quiet, slow, controlled. Nobody noticed the way her knuckles went white beneath the table, because she knew who one of those pilots was. She hadn't seen him in years, not since the day he left without saying goodbye, not since the day she buried the letters he never answered, but she knew his call sign. It was burned into her memory like the scar on her wrist. Now he was in enemy hands, and she was sitting here, pretending she was just another soldier at the table. The briefing dragged on. Coordinates, weather patterns, supply routes. The others scribbled notes. She stared. She didn't need notes. The land lived inside her like an old wound that never healed. Every ridge, every dry riverbed, every shadowed pass. She could smell the dust already, taste the metal in the air. But there was something they didn't know, something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Night fell heavy over the outpost. The desert breathed with cold, sharp winds, whistling through broken fences and sagging wires. She sat on her cot, the thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a notebook open on her lap. Blank pages stared back. She had carried this notebook for months, waiting for the moment words might come. But words never came easy, not when silence was safer. Her bunkmate, Torres, leaned against the doorframe, cleaning her rifle with slow, deliberate strokes. She was older, skin weathered by sun, eyes that carried whole wars in them. Torres didn't speak much, but when she did, every word had weight. "You don't write?" she asked, nodding toward the notebook. The soldier shrugged, closing it. "Not tonight." Torres smiled faintly, a rare crack in her stone face. "Then you're smarter than most. Words, they make you remember things better than you want to." The silence after that was heavy. Torres wasn't wrong. Words had teeth. Words opened doors to ghosts, and she already had too many of those. She lay back, staring at the ceiling where shadows crawled with every gust of wind. Tomorrow they would set out. Tomorrow she would walk again through the land of her childhood, but not as a daughter, as something else entirely. Sleep didn't come. Instead, fragments of memory flooded her, the laughter of her brother running across the same dusty hills, the voice of her father telling stories about the river that once cut through the canyon, back when water still dared to flow there. And then, sharper, the last time she saw the pilot, the way he looked at her as if words might spill out but never did, the silence that lasted years. She clenched her jaw, turned her face to the wall. If he was really out there, if he was still alive, then this mission wasn't just about orders. It was about unfinished things, about debts that silence had left unpaid. But she couldn't tell them that, couldn't risk being pulled off the team, couldn't show weakness, so she carried it alone. Dawn broke without color, just light, thin, and brittle, cutting through clouds like glass. Engines roared in the yard. Men shouted over each other, loading gear, checking weapons, tying boots tight. She pulled on her pack, felt the straps bite into her shoulders, felt the weight settle like an anchor. Torres caught her arm as they walked to the trucks. "You good?" A simple question, but it wasn't simple to answer. She nodded. "I'm fine." Torres studied her for a moment, then let go. "Good, because fine is all we get out here." They rolled out just after sunrise. The convoy snaked through the desert, dust rising in long, tired plumes behind them. She sat in the back, rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every bump in the road rattled through her bones. Every mile carried them closer, not just to the mission, but to the ghosts waiting in the dust. No one spoke much. The silence was heavy, but it was the kind of silence soldiers understood. Words wasted air. Eyes said enough. But one of the younger soldiers, Grant, finally broke it. His voice was shaky, like a kid trying too hard to sound grown. "You ever think about what it's like being caught? I mean, if they got you." No one answered right away. Then Torres leaned forward, voice low. "You don't think about it. You do your job so it doesn't happen." Grant swallowed, nodding too fast, but the question lingered in the air, buzzing like a fly that wouldn't die. She kept her eyes on the horizon, but inside the words twisted. What if they had him? What if he was waiting? What if she was too late? She didn't let herself finish the thought. The convoy stopped at a ridge overlooking the canyon. Engines cut off. Silence pressed in again. She stepped out, boots sinking into sand, the air sharp with the smell of fuel and gun oil. Below, the canyon stretched wide, dry and broken, a scar across the earth. Somewhere down there, their people were waiting, or bodies were. The colonel gave his orders. Teams split off, each assigned a sector, a route, a risk. She listened, but her mind kept drifting, back to the call sign she remembered, the name she hadn't spoken in years. She adjusted the strap on her pack. Her hand trembled just slightly. No one noticed. She made sure of it. They started the descent. And for the first time in years, she set foot on the same dust that had once clung to her childhood shoes. Her footsteps carved rivers through the dust, silent, heavy, flowing with sacrifice no words could hold. But this time, she wasn't the girl who had left. This time, she was the one carrying the weight. Why did her heart pound harder the deeper she went into the canyon? The others marched with steady, practiced rhythm, boots crunching against loose stone, rifles shifting against their backs. But for her, every step was heavier than the one before, like the land itself remembered her and pressed down in judgment. The walls of the canyon rose on both sides, jagged scars painted in ochre and gray, whispering with echoes of wind. Somewhere in that silence, she thought she heard her own childhood laughter, faint, broken, stolen by time. She adjusted her pack, tried to shake the ghosts, tried to look like everyone else. But Torres was watching. Torres always watched. "You've been quiet," she muttered, her eyes scanning the ridges above. The soldier forced a small smile. "Quiet is survival." Torres didn't argue, but she didn't look away either. A beat passed, then another, until Torres finally nodded. "Yeah, but sometimes, too quiet means you're thinking about something you shouldn't." The words cut deeper than Torres could have known, because she was thinking about something she shouldn't, someone she shouldn't, the pilot, the unfinished silence between them. Her chest tightened, but she buried it fast. By midday, the sun burned hot enough to peel skin. Heat shimmered off the rocks. Sweat crawled down her back, soaking the collar of her shirt, stinging her eyes. The team stopped in the shade of a cliff face, rifles propped against stone, canteens passed around in silence. She sat apart, staring at the horizon through the sliver of sky above. Dust swirled lazily like smoke from a dying fire. She thought about the colonel's words, "if you come back at all." She had seen men not come back. She had zipped the body bags herself, but this felt different. This wasn't faceless war. This wasn't nameless captives. This was personal, too personal, and if anyone knew that. Here, a canteen landed beside her boot, Torres again. Her shadow cut the light, her eyes unreadable. The soldier nodded her thanks, unscrewed the cap, and drank deep. The water was warm, metallic. Still, it was enough to remind her body she was alive. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, but the dryness in her throat lingered. Torres crouched beside her. "You're wound up. You hide it well, but I can see it. Who are you carrying in your head?" The question hit like a strike. She froze, the canteen still in her hand. For a second she thought of telling the truth, of saying his name, of unburdening the silence, but the words locked inside her chest. "No one," she said finally, "just the mission." Torres studied her for a long moment, then leaned back against the rock. "Everyone says that, until the bullets fly. Then you find out who you're really carrying." The canteen shook in her hand, just slightly. She tightened her grip until her knuckles turned pale. They moved again as shadows lengthened across the canyon. The air cooled, the wind shifting. The world felt sharper, more alive. Every sound carried too far, a pebble skittering, a boot scraping stone, the dry whisper of fabric. The silence wasn't empty, it was waiting. The younger soldier, Grant, kept glancing up at the cliffs, his nerves written all over his face. At one point he tripped on loose gravel, nearly fell, and Torres grabbed his arm to steady him. "Eyes forward," she hissed. "Don't look for what you don't want to find." Grant nodded, but his breathing was too fast, too loud. Fear clung to him like a second skin. She wanted to say something, reassure him maybe, but the words stuck, because she wasn't sure if she believed them herself. Instead she listened. Listened for things that didn't belong. The metallic click of a rifle bolt, the hiss of a radio, the echo of footsteps not their own. But all she heard was wind. Until she didn't. It was faint, carried on the air. A voice, a man, then another. Foreign words she couldn't catch. The patrol froze, rifles raised, bodies pressed into the rocks. Her pulse hammered. The voices came closer, laughter drifting through the canyon like ghosts mocking them. Then the sound of boots against gravel. Shadows stretched long across the rocks above them. The colonel held up his hand, the signal to wait. The soldier pressed her cheek against the stone, heart pounding in her throat. She could see them now, two enemy fighters, rifles slung, cigarettes glowing like fireflies in the dusk. They were close enough she could smell the smoke, hear the scrape of their boots. Grant's breath quickened beside her, too loud, too much. She reached over, placed her hand lightly against his arm, grounding him. His eyes darted to hers, wide, scared, and for a moment she let him see her steady gaze, silent reassurance, silent command, breathe. The fighters moved on, voices fatting, boots crunching away until only the wind remained. The colonel lowered his hand. The patrol exhaled as one. But her hand lingered on Grant's arm a moment longer, until she felt his breathing steady. Then she pulled away, silent again. That night they camped beneath an overhang, the fire small and shielded from sight. The stars above were sharp, merciless, scattered across the black sky like shards of glass. She sat apart again, knees drawn up, staring at the flames. Firelight flickered across her face, casting deep shadows in her eyes. Torres joined her, lowering herself with a quiet grunt. For a while they just listened to the crackle of wood, the hiss of wind sneaking through the canyon. Then Torres spoke. "You remind me of my sister," she said softly. She carried silence like it was armor, thought if she never spoke nothing could hurt her, but silence cuts both ways. The soldier turned, surprised. Torres rarely shared anything personal. What happened to her? Torres stared into the fire, the glow reflecting in her eyes. She stopped talking. One day she just never came back from whatever she was holding inside. We buried her long before the ground did. The soldier's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, a comfort maybe, but the words wouldn't come. Torres smiled faintly as if she expected the silence. "Just don't let it eat you, that's all I'm saying." The soldier looked back at the fire. Her face was steady, unreadable, but inside her silence was screaming. Because the person she carried wasn't buried yet. He was alive, maybe. And if she admitted it, even once, she'd have to face what she'd left unsaid all those years ago. Sleep came in fragments, startled dreams, half-remembered voices. At one point she woke to the sound of wind howling through the canyon like someone whispering her name. She sat up, breath sharp, eyes searching the shadows. But it was only stone and wind. She lay back down, but sleep never returned. She stared at the stars until dawn bled pale across the horizon. When they set out again, her body felt heavier. Every mile stretched longer than the last. Her mind kept circling back to the same thought. Was he alive? Did he remember her? Or had silence erased her completely? She pushed the questions down, step after step, but they rose again like dust. And as the canyon narrowed, pressing them into shadow, she couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was listening, watching, waiting to reveal its truth. She adjusted her rifle strap, swallowed the dryness in her throat, and kept walking. Because there was no turning back now. The desert sun had not yet reached its burning peak, but already the camp was restless. Soldiers moved in quick strides, carrying crates of ammunition, jugs of water, and tarps meant to shield equipment from the biting heat. Radios crackled with distorted transmissions, carrying orders that shifted like sand underfoot. Aisha stood at the edge of the command tent, her olive-green shirt pressed with sweat across her shoulders, the rolled sleeves streaked with dust. She had just returned from a night patrol, her boots still caked with desert grit, yet her mind was sharper than ever. She had been scanning the horizon, not only for threats of attack but for something deeper, an unease she could not yet explain. The commander's voice bellowed from inside the tent. "We're tightening perimeter security. No one leaves or enters without triple-checking clearance codes. No mistakes. If one slip happens, the whole camp pays." But beneath that stern tone, there was a tremor. Aisha noticed it yesterday when orders were delayed by nearly an hour. Communications had been cut, then miraculously restored, yet no one explained why. When she entered the tent, she found the others already inside. Tariq leaned against the table, map spread before him, his usually bright humor replaced by grim silence. Rahim was crouched near the radio equipment, tightening connections, his eyes flicking up with suspicion at every sudden noise. Sarah, the medic, was scribbling notes on a clipboard, but her knuckles were white from how tightly she gripped the pen. "Sit," the commander said, not looking at Aisha. "We need to discuss what we know." Aisha sat, her gaze moving over the map pinned down by stones to keep the desert wind from scattering it. Red circles marked positions of potential ambush sites. Blue lines marked their supply routes. But in several places, someone had scratched faint question marks with the tip of a pencil, routes they had relied on for months now deemed unsafe. "What's going on?" Aisha asked, her voice low, careful. The commander finally looked at her. "There's a leak. Somewhere inside this camp, someone is feeding information to the enemy." The words hung heavy in the air, as if the desert itself had stopped to listen. Rahim dropped the wrench in his hand, the metallic clang sharp against the silence. "You're saying we have a traitor?" The commander's jaw tightened. "I'm saying our movements are being anticipated. Patrols are intercepted too often to be coincidence. Supplies have gone missing without a trace. And last night," he paused, his eyes hardening. "Last night, a coded transmission was sent out from within our own frequency. It wasn't ours." Tariq's fist slammed against the table, rattling the map. "So, someone here is selling us out." Sarah exhaled shakily. "But who? We've trained together, fought together." "Trust is earned," the commander cut her off. "But right now it is also a luxury. Until we find who it is, assume nothing." Aisha felt her pulse quicken. The desert wind slipped into the tent, tugging at the corners of the map, whispering like ghosts of all the men and women who had already fallen to betrayal. Her mind raced. Who among them could possibly betray the mission? She scanned their faces: Tarek, with his loyalty carved deep from years of shared hardship; Sarah, who had patched wounds that no one else dared touch; Rahim, whose quiet precision had saved their radios during storms. And yet, suspicion was poison. Once planted, it spread. The commander pushed forward a folder. Intercepted fragments from the transmission, not much but enough. He opened it, revealing scrawled notes and jagged printouts from static-filled messages. Coordinates, timings, mentions of our supply caravan leaving tonight. "That caravan is essential," Rahim muttered, his voice almost trembling. "If they know when it's moving, we're finished." Silence returned, broken only by the faint hum of the radio. Aisha's eyes fell on the notes. The handwriting wasn't familiar, but the codes, she recognized them. They weren't enemy codes. They were standard issue, which meant whoever had sent the message knew their systems inside and out. Her stomach turned cold. The meeting ended with orders to double security and prepare for movement at dusk. But Aisha lingered. When the others dispersed, she caught the commander's arm. "Sir," she whispered, "you already suspect someone, don't you?" The commander's eyes met hers, weary and sharp. "Yes, but suspicion without proof is worse than the betrayal itself. If I accuse the wrong one, I break this unit apart." "Then let me help," Aisha said, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "Whoever it is, they'll slip. I'll be watching." The commander studied her for a long moment, then gave the faintest nod. Quietly, "No one else must know." That night, as the desert swallowed the last colors of sunset, Aisha found herself standing guard near the perimeter. The stars were beginning to prick the sky, sharp and cold, while the sand shifted restlessly beneath the wind. She held her rifle loosely, but her real weapon was her attention. One by one, shadows moved across the camp, soldiers setting up sandbags, adjusting tarps, checking fuel supplies. The caravan was almost ready. Tarek approached, carrying 2 canteens. "Thought you'd be thirsty," he said, offering one with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She accepted, unscrewing the cap but pretending to drink, her instincts prickling. Tarek had always been light-hearted, always making jokes even in the darkest hours. Tonight, though, his face was unreadable. "You believe this talk of a traitor?" he asked, casually leaning against the sandbag wall. "What do you believe?" she countered. He shrugged. "I believe war makes people desperate. Desperate enough to sell secrets, maybe, but not us, not this unit. We're too stubborn." Aisha studied him. His words were convincing, his tone steady. But then again, wouldn't a traitor sound exactly like that? Before she could reply, a faint crackle sounded from the portable radio clipped to her vest. Static, then a burst of code, not their frequency. Her blood froze. She stepped away quickly, pretending to scan the perimeter, but her eyes darted toward the comms tent. The transmission had come from inside their camp again. Leaving Tarek behind, she strode briskly, her boots crunching in the sand, her heart hammering. The comms tent glowed faintly with lantern light, its canvas walls trembling in the wind. She slipped inside. Rahim was there, hunched over the radio. His hands moved fast, adjusting dials, scribbling notes. He looked up, startled. "Aisha, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to the paper beside him. On it, fresh symbols marked down coordinates, exact ones for tonight's caravan. Her hand instinctively went to her rifle strap. "Explain," she demanded, her voice sharper than steel. Rahim's eyes widened. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what I should think," she shot back, stepping closer. "Because right now it looks like you're feeding the enemy." He raised his hands, palms trembling. "I swear, I was tracing the signal. Someone else is sending these out, but I have to copy them down to trace the origin. If I can't match the signal strength, we'll never find them." Aisha's breath caught. His explanation made sense, but it could just as easily be a lie spun by someone caught red-handed. Before she could decide, Sarah pushed through the tent flap. "What's happening?" she asked, eyes darting between them. The tension thickened. 3 soldiers, 1 accusation. A camp waiting outside, unaware that trust was unraveling inside. Aisha tightened her grip on the rifle strap. "If you're telling the truth, Rahim, prove it. Show me how you're tracing it, now." Rahim nodded frantically and turned back to the equipment, his fingers flying. The radio hissed, lines of code dancing through static. Slowly, he triangulated the signal. The location blinked on the screen, a pulse of light on their own camp map. The breath in Aisha's chest turned heavy. The source was Rahim. It wasn't even inside the comms tent. It was. Her voice cracked with disbelief. The commander's quarters. The revelation hit like a storm. For a moment, none of them moved. Even the desert wind seemed to pause. Sarah whispered, "That can't be right, the commander." But the blinking light on the map didn't waver. It pulsed steadily, each flash a knife cutting deeper into everything they thought they knew. Aisha's mind raced. If it was true, if the commander himself was feeding their enemies, then everything, the ambushes, the missing supplies, the intercepted patrols, it all made sense. But why? What could drive him to such betrayal? She clenched her fists. Questions would have to wait. Tonight they had to stop him before the caravan left. Her eyes hardened with resolve. If the commander is the leak, then everything changes. We either confront him now, or we walk into a trap that none of us come back from. And in that moment, Aisha realized. Her war had just shifted from fighting an enemy outside their camp to uncovering one hidden within. The desert wind carried with it the smell of iron and dust, as if the earth itself had been scorched by betrayal. Inside the comms tent, the blinking light on the monitor pulsed relentlessly, each flash a reminder that everything Aisha thought she knew about loyalty, command, and trust might collapse in a single night. The commander. The thought gnawed at her like a blade pressed against her ribs. He was the one who had drilled discipline into them, who had held their fragile unity together with the force of his voice. To imagine him as the leak, the traitor who had handed their positions to the enemy, was almost unbearable. And yet the evidence glared back, unyielding. Sarah's hand trembled around her clipboard, the paper crinkling in her grip. "Aisha, maybe it's a mistake. Maybe the signal's bouncing, and it only looks like it's coming from his quarters." Rahim shook his head, his fingers still dancing across the dials. "No, I traced it twice. The transmission source is clear. The signal strength matches his location exactly. There's no mistake." Aisha forced herself to breathe. The desert outside seemed to close in, the night pressing heavy against the thin canvas of the tent. "Then we can't wait," she said at last. "If the commander is sending information, every second we sit here, the enemy prepares another move. We need to confront him, quietly. If the wrong people hear, panic will tear this camp apart before the enemy even arrives." Rahim's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "And if you're wrong?" Her jaw tightened. "Then I'll take the blame, but if I'm right," her eyes flicked between them, sharp and unwavering, "then we stop him before it's too late." The walk to the commander's quarters was short, but it felt endless. The desert stretched wide and indifferent, stars glaring down like silent judges. Their boots pressed into the sand with muffled crunches, each step weighed down by the gravity of what they were about to do. The commander's tent stood at the far edge of the camp, guarded only by the stillness of the night. Its canvas flapped lightly in the wind, lantern light glowing faintly inside. Aisha held up a hand, signaling Rahim and Sarah to wait. She crouched, checking for signs of movement. No guards, no voices, just that quiet flicker of lamplight. She straightened, her rifle slung but ready. "Stay behind me," she whispered, then stepped forward. The flap opened with a faint rustle. Inside, the commander sat hunched over a small table, a radio set before him. He didn't look up as they entered. his hand scribbling notes on a scrap of paper. The faint hum of static filled the air, punctuated by sharp bursts of coded transmission. It was undeniable. "Commander," Aisha said, her voice cutting through the silence. He froze, his pen stilled. Slowly he turned, his weathered face catching the lantern glow. His eyes, once stern, unyielding, flicked over the three of them. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, heavy. Rahim stepped forward, his voice cracking. "We traced the signal, it's you. All along it was you." For a moment the commander said nothing. Then he sighed, leaning back in his chair. His shoulders sagged, the weight of something unbearable pressing down. "You're sharp, Aisha," he murmured. "Too sharp. I knew it was only a matter of time before you put the pieces together." Sarah's voice shook. Why would you do this? You led us, you kept us alive, why betray us?" The commander's gaze hardened, though pain flickered in his eyes. "Betrayal," he let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call survival?" Aisha narrowed her eyes. "Explain." He stood, his shadow stretching across the lantern-lit canvas. "You think command is simple, that orders come from the heart. No, they come from men sitting in glass towers far from the front lines. Men who don't bleed, don't watch comrades die in the sand. Do you know what they asked of us?" Silence. "They asked me to hold this position, this worthless scrap of desert, knowing reinforcements would never arrive, knowing we were pawns to be sacrificed to buy them time elsewhere." His voice grew harsher, cracking under the weight of fury. "So I made a choice. I gave the enemy what they wanted, small things, movements, routes, enough to keep their focus here, to keep them circling us instead of pressing forward to the cities. Every sacrifice bought time for others, for civilians, for people who still have a future." Rahim's eyes widened with horror. "You fed them, our people. You traded lives like pieces on a board." The commander's fist slammed against the table, rattling the radio. "Do you think I don't carry their faces in my nightmares? Do you think I don't hear their screams when I close my eyes? I did what was necessary. Command abandoned us long before I made my first transmission." Sarah shook her head violently, tears brimming. "You had no right. We trusted you, we followed you." "And I kept you alive," he snapped. "Longer than we had any right to be. Without me, this camp would have been ash in the desert months ago." The tent quivered with the storm of his words. Aisha stepped closer, her hand brushing the rifle strap. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "You may think you're saving lives, but every secret you give them, every step you predict for them, it's one more soldier never coming home. That isn't survival, that's surrender." For the first time, the commander's mask cracked. Pain flashed across his face, raw and human, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he whispered, "You don't understand. None of you do." Aisha's jaw clenched. "Then make me understand." His eyes lifted, weary, defeated. "Because I've seen what's coming, and it doesn't matter what we do, it's already lost. The enemy has more men, more weapons, more control. We can't win this. I gave them what they wanted so I could delay the inevitable. At least this way, some of you still breathe." The words cut deep. For a moment, doubt flickered in Aisha's chest. Was he right? Were they truly fighting a war already lost? But then she remembered the faces of the soldiers who had laughed with her, the voices that sang around the fires even in the bleakest nights, the hands that had lifted her when she stumbled. They hadn't fought because victory was certain. They fought because giving up was not an option. She drew herself tall, her voice ringing with quiet steel. "Then you've already lost, Commander, not to the enemy but to fear." His jaw tightened, his eyes glimmering with unspoken anguish. For a long moment the tent held only silence. Then the commander's shoulders slumped. He looked at them, his voice no louder than a whisper. "Do what you must." Aisha froze. She had expected anger, denial, even violence, not resignation. Sarah gasped softly, lowering her clipboard. Rahim's fists clenched, his rage trembling with the weight of betrayal. But it was Aisha who felt the heaviest burden. To accuse the commander was one thing. To act on it, to strip him of power, to brand him as a traitor, was another. It would shatter the unit, rip apart whatever trust remained. And yet if they did nothing, the caravan leaving tonight would walk into an ambush they could not survive. Her mind raced. "Bind him," she ordered finally, her voice cracking but firm. "If we take him to the others, chaos will erupt. But if we keep him restrained until the caravan passes, at least they have a chance." Rahim moved immediately, pulling cord from his belt. The commander didn't resist as his wrists were tied. He only lowered his head, his silence heavier than any protest. Sarah turned away, tears slipping down her face. "How do we tell them?" she whispered. Aisha swallowed hard. "We don't, not yet. If the unit learns the truth now, they'll crumble. Tonight we hold the line. Tomorrow," her voice faltered, but she pushed forward. "It's tomorrow they'll know." The night stretched on, each second weighted with dread. Outside, the caravan prepared to move, unaware of the storm brewing inside their own camp. Soldiers laughed quietly, shared canteens, adjusted their gear, all the small rituals of men and women trying to forget the danger ahead. And in the shadows of a hidden tent, their commander sat bound, silent, his eyes fixed on the sand as though he were already buried beneath it. Aisha stood at the edge of the camp, her rifle clutched in steady hands, her heart torn between fury and sorrow. The war was no longer just outside their walls. It was inside them now, a wound that would never heal. But as the first trucks rumbled into motion, their engines growling into the desert night, Aisha knew one truth above all else. Betrayal could shatter trust. It could wound the heart of any army. But as long as even one soldier chose to fight, not for orders, not for survival, but for each other, then the war was not yet lost. The caravan moved into the desert night like a fragile thread of light unraveling into endless darkness. The headlights carved narrow tunnels through dust and shadow, engines growling low against the silence. Every truck carried soldiers whose laughter and quiet conversations masked a fear none dared to admit. And at the front of it all, Aisha walked, not in the commander's shadow anymore, not following orders from a voice above her. No, tonight every step pressed into the earth felt like it belonged to her alone. Her rifle rested against her chest, its weight familiar, its cold metal almost comforting. But the weight inside her heart, that was unbearable. She had left him behind, tied, silenced. A man she had once trusted, a man who had been her compass in storms of fire and blood, betrayed by him, and yet she couldn't bring herself to see him as a monster. His words echoed still. "I did what was necessary." The thought gnawed at her. What if he had been right? What if they were walking into a desert that would eat them alive no matter what she did? The trucks rumbled on. The sand carried the vibrations like a whisper of doom. Rahim trudged beside her, his face stern, jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from stone. He didn't speak much now, not since binding the commander's wrists with his own hands. Guilt clung to him, though he disguised it with anger. Sarah followed close, her eyes scanning maps lit faintly by the glow of a red flashlight. Every so often she whispered course corrections to the drivers, her voice quiet but steady. She had cried earlier. Now her face was dry, her expression locked into something unreadable. Aisha broke the silence first. "How far until the canyon pass?" 2 hours, Sarah answered without looking up. "If the route holds." "If," Rahim muttered bitterly. The word lingered in the air like poison. The first hour passed in uneasy quiet. Soldiers dozed in the backs of the trucks, rifles clutched to their chests even in sleep. Others hummed low tunes or murmured to each other, voices swallowed by the roar of the engines. The desert stretched on vast, endless, merciless. Then came the sound. A faint pop, distant, almost like a firecracker carried on the wind. Every soldier stiffened instantly. Heads turned, fingers tightened on triggers. Another pop followed, sharper. Then a streak of light cut across the sky, flare red against the dark. Down, Aisha hissed. Her voice snapped like a whip. The convoy halted at once. Engines sputtered into silence. Soldiers scrambled from trucks, taking cover behind tires against dunes, rifles trained on the shadows. The desert, moments ago calm, had transformed into a predator. Ambush, Rahim whispered at her side. Not yet, she said, though her gut twisted. But someone's watching. Someone wants us to move wrong. Sarah crouched low, flashlight snapped off. It's the pass. They're waiting for us to enter. They'll choke us from both ends. Aisha's mind raced. The canyon pass was the only direct route. If it was compromised, they had two options: turn back or cut into open desert where there was no cover, no water, no certainty of survival. Her breath hitched. She remembered the commander's words again. They'll never let you through. Had he known this? Had he bought their survival by steering them into the jaws of death? Orders? Rahim asked, eyes burning into her. Every pair of eyes turned to her then. Soldiers crouched in the shadows, breathing fast, waiting for direction. They didn't look for the commander anymore. They looked at her. Sorry. And she wasn't ready. She swallowed hard, tasting dust. We hold here, she said at last, forcing her voice to stay calm. No one enters the pass until we know what waits inside. Scouts only, quiet, fast, invisible. Rahim nodded. I'll go. No, she cut him off sharply. You stay with the convoy. If something happens to me, they'll need you to lead. His mouth opened to protest, but her stare silenced him. For once he obeyed. She motioned to two younger soldiers, boys really, both barely old enough to shave. You're with me. Stay low, stay silent, stay alive. They nodded, eyes wide, adrenaline surging. And then they slipped into the desert night. The sand crunched faintly under her boots. Every breath felt like thunder. The canyon loomed ahead, jagged walls black against the starlit sky. The air seemed to hold its breath with them. One boy, Karim, whispered, You think they're waiting inside? Aisha didn't answer. His voice was too loud already. She gave him a sharp glance, finger pressed to her lips. Silence, always silence. They crept closer. The mouth of the canyon yawned wide, shadows deep as graves. A faint metallic glimmer caught her eye, something wedged in the rock. She crouched, reached out. Her fingers brushed steel, a wire. Trip mine. Her pulse spiked. She froze, every muscle stiff. Slowly, carefully, she withdrew her hand. Her voice was a whisper carried on the edge of breath. Booby-trapped, the whole pass. The boy's eyes widened with horror. She motioned them back, slow, deliberate, but then... a crunch. Karim's boot had pressed into loose gravel. It skittered down the canyon slope, the sound impossibly loud. Aisha's heart stopped. And then the night exploded. Gunfire erupted from the canyon walls, tracer rounds cutting neon lines through darkness. Bullets slammed into sand, sparking off rocks, ripping into the air where they had stood seconds before. Run, she barked, shoving Karim down the slope. They tumbled into the desert, adrenaline ripping through them. The convoy opened fire in return, rifles cracking, machine guns roaring. The desert lit up in chaos, muzzle flashes painting the dunes in strobe-like fury. Aisha dragged Karim by his collar, the other boy stumbling close behind. They slid into cover behind a dune, bullets hissing overhead. Rahim's voice shouted through the comms, Aisha, status. Traps in the pass, she shouted over the roar of battle. It's a kill box we can't go through. Static crackled, then Rahim's voice again. Then where? We're pinned down here. Her mind raced, chaos blurring the world around her. She forced herself to breathe, to push back the panic clawing at her throat. She thought of the maps, the commander's notes, his whispered warnings. There had been another route, hadn't there? Risky, longer, through shifting dunes no vehicle was meant to cross. But maybe their only chance. She grabbed the radio, her voice steel through the storm. We cut into the open desert, east flank, now. Rahim hesitated. That's suicide. It's survival, she snapped. Move. The order spread. Engines roared back to life. Trucks lurched, sand flying under their tires as they veered east, away from the death trap of the canyon. Soldiers fired cover bursts, retreating step by step, clambering into the vehicles under fire. Aisha covered the rear, rifle snapping shot after shot, muzzle flashing bright in the night. The two boys clung to her, shaking but alive. Bullets tore past her ear, one grazing her sleeve, the heat of it burning her skin. Her breath came ragged, lungs screaming. But step by step they moved. And then, as the last truck pulled away, Aisha dove onto the tailgate, Rahim yanking her inside just as rounds peppered the steel frame. The truck jolted forward, tires screaming across sand. They were moving, they had escaped. For now. Silence came only after hours, when the gunfire faded behind them and the desert swallowed sound once more. Inside the truck, soldiers sat slumped, faces pale with exhaustion. Some checked wounds, bandaging arms and legs in the dim glow of flashlights. Others stared blankly, shock carved into their eyes. Kareem sat against the wall, his chest heaving. His lips trembled as he whispered, "I thought I was dead." Aisha sat beside him, wiping dust and sweat from her brow. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You weren't, and you won't be, not while I'm still breathing." He looked at her, eyes wide with something between fear and awe. "How do you stay so calm?" She almost laughed, except nothing about this night was funny. Calm, inside she was breaking. Inside her hands shook, her heart raced, her mind screamed. But she couldn't show it, not now. So she just said softly, "Because you needed me to be." His head lowered, silent, but she saw the way his hands stopped trembling. Later, when most had drifted into exhausted half-sleep, Rahim leaned close, his voice low. "You knew, didn't you? You knew the pass would be a trap. That's why the commander tried to stop us." Aisha's throat tightened. "Maybe." Maybe, his eyes burned into hers. Or maybe he wasn't betraying us. Maybe he was saving us the only way he knew how. She didn't answer, couldn't. Instead, she turned her gaze to the desert beyond, endless, unforgiving. The dunes stretched like waves of a sea that would never end. Somewhere in that vast silence lay survival or annihilation. And for the first time, Aisha wondered if she had traded one death for another. The engines droned on, carrying them deeper into the unknown. The stars burned cold above. And as the horizon swallowed the last traces of the canyon behind them, Aisha realized something that chilled her more than the night wind. The war outside was brutal. The war inside her was worse. Why did she hesitate with her finger just above the trigger? The target was there, framed perfectly in her scope, steady despite the tremor in her heart. The air was still except for the low hum of distant machinery. Dust hung like suspended time, golden in the pale wash of morning light. She should have pulled. Her training demanded it. Her orders required it. The voices of every drill sergeant she'd ever had echoed in her memory: "Don't think. Execute." And yet she thought. Because the man in her scope wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't aiming at anyone. He was just walking, shoulders stooped, head bowed. His gait reminded her of someone else, someone she had buried long before she had picked up a rifle. Her breath caught and she blinked hard, trying to reset her focus. But no reset came. The hesitation remained. And in that hesitation, the weight of her choices came crashing back. The radio at her side crackled. "Echo 2, confirm. Why haven't you fired?" Her finger pressed a little closer to the trigger, the tension in her muscles screaming to end the pause. She could have ended it in a heartbeat, but she whispered to herself instead, too softly for the comms to catch. "He looks like my father." No one had asked, no one would understand. For a moment her mind wasn't in the dusty valley below. It was in a garage years ago, the air thick with motor oil and cigarette smoke. Her father's hands cracked, scarred from decades of labor, teaching her how to steady a wrench, how to keep calm when the world around her rattled. He had been a man of silence like her, but silence could hold oceans. She hadn't realized that until it was too late. The memory stung. She blinked again, and when her eye returned to the scope, the man was gone. The chance had passed, and with it something else. Her earpiece snapped again. Echo 2, report. Her throat tightened. She could lie. She could invent some excuse. But instead she muttered, target moved. A beat of silence. Then the reply came, curt and cutting. Copy that, stay alert. She lowered the rifle. Her spotter, a young Marine with a scar across his cheek, glanced at her. He didn't speak, but his eyes said what his mouth wouldn't. That's not like you. She ignored it, focusing on the terrain instead. They stayed there in the heat, motionless shadows carved into the rock. Hours bled together, every sound magnified, the clink of a loose pebble, the whisper of hot wind through cracks, the faint thump of boots from far below. She listened, waiting, her pulse slowly calming but never quite returning to rhythm. The mission continued, but she couldn't shake the slip, the hesitation. Later, when the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the valley, she leaned back and closed her eyes. Just for a second, just enough to steal a fragment of rest. That's when the Marine beside her spoke, his voice low. You ever not take a shot just because? Her eyes opened. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't testing. He was asking like someone who needed an answer. She studied him. His jaw was tight, but his hand tapped nervously against his knee. She recognized that tick, anxiety disguised as rhythm. Once, she said. Her voice was flat, but it carried weight. He nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had been battling himself. He didn't press for more, and she didn't offer it. That was enough. Silence reclaimed the rock. But her mind wasn't silent. It was louder than the valley, louder than the radio, because she knew deep down that this wasn't about one shot. It was about all of them. Every pull of the trigger she had ever taken, every target that had crumpled under her scope. They haunted her in fragments, the sound of boots scrambling, the shock in an enemy's eyes, the way silence always followed violence. And now, she wondered if the ghosts would multiply because of the shot she didn't take. That night back at the outpost, she cleaned her rifle with deliberate care. Her hands moved methodically, almost ritualistic. But her mind was far away. She thought of her father again, how he had taught her patience, how he had told her once that restraint was harder than force. Maybe he had been right. Maybe that's what the hesitation was, restraint. Humanity breaking through training, but in war, humanity could be dangerous. Her co didn't ask questions in the debrief. The mission wasn't compromised, and in this world, results mattered more than reasons. Still, she felt eyes on her in the mess hall. Whispers. She sat alone, pushing food around her tray. And yet part of her welcomed the isolation. Silence was safer. As she sat there, the Marine with the scar slid into the seat across from her. He didn't say anything at first. He just ate, quick and quiet. Then, between bites, he muttered, sometimes not pulling the trigger saves more than pulling it. She glanced at him. He didn't look up, but she caught the edge of truth in his tone. A truth born from his own hesitation, his own ghosts. For the first time that day, she let herself breathe easier. But in the back of her mind, the question lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. What happens when hesitation isn't mercy, but a mistake that costs lives? She didn't know yet, but she would. And when that moment came, she feared it would demand more of her than any bullet ever could. Why did the village fall silent the moment she stepped inside? She had been trained to notice patterns. The sound of life, the natural pulse of a place, children laughing, old men arguing, footsteps on stone, animals scurrying. Villages were noisy. Even war couldn't erase that. But this place was still, too still. Her boots pressed into the dust, leaving faint impressions in the fading light. Each step felt heavier than the last. The sun was low, its glow staining the clay walls orange, but no one appeared in the doorways. No one leaned from windows. Shadows hid behind curtains, breath held, waiting. She raised her hand, signaling her team to stop. They obeyed instantly, rifles raised, eyes scanning. The young Marine with the scar on his cheek froze beside her, his jaw tightening. He had seen it too. "Something's wrong," he muttered under his breath. Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed neutral. Calm was survival. She crouched, adjusting her rifle strap, and whispered into comms. "Echo unit, hold positions, no sudden movements." Silence answered back, but it wasn't empty. It was thick, heavy, pregnant with the kind of danger that didn't announce itself until it was too late. And then a sound, a soft scrape of wood against stone, to her right. Her rifle was up before thought caught up. She aimed down the narrow street, breath sharp, fingers steady on the trigger. A door cracked open, just an inch, just enough to reveal a child's eye staring at her. Her chest tightened. The boy couldn't have been more than 6. His face was streaked with dust, lips cracked from heat. He wasn't armed. He wasn't a threat. But his eye, it wasn't fear she saw. It was warning. And before she could process what it meant, the first explosion tore through the air. The ground shook. Heat roared against her face. Shrapnel screamed past her shoulder. Instinct shoved her to the dirt, dragging the Marine with her. Her ears rang, the comms hissing with static, and shouted orders. "Ambush, ambush." Her vision blurred, then sharpened again in quick bursts. Dust swallowed the street. Shadows darted between rooftops. The world became noise, chaos, confusion. But in the center of it, her mind narrowed to one truth. They had walked into a trap. Her team scrambled for cover. Bullets tore through clay walls, splintering wood, showering debris. The Marine beside her returned fire, his movements sharp, controlled, but his eyes flicked to her, waiting for direction. Always waiting. She forced herself up, bracing against the corner of a wall. The air was thick with cordite, burning her lungs with every breath. Through the haze she saw them, insurgents moving with purpose, funneling fire down the narrow choke points of the village. They had planned this. They had waited. And she had hesitated. That boy's eye flashed in her mind again. The warning, she had seen it. She had felt it. And yet she had led them here anyway. Guilt stabbed at her chest, sharper than the ringing gunfire. But guilt couldn't command, not now. Her voice cut through the calm, steady, cold. "Break formation, push west, use smoke, don't stop moving." She signaled with her hand, tossing a smoke grenade into the street. It burst into a choking white cloud, swallowing their shapes, buying them seconds. Seconds were life. The Marine tapped her shoulder, gesturing left. A narrow alley, crumbling, dangerous, but cover. She nodded. Together they sprinted through the dust, ducking bullets that whistled past like hornets. Her heart pounded, but her mind sharpened with every step. This was survival. This was clarity. No hesitation now. They crashed into the alley, pressing against the cold wall, lungs heaving. The Marine's face was streaked with sweat and dirt, but his eyes locked on hers. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. His voice was low, ragged. "The kid, you knew." Her throat went dry. For a split second she wanted to deny it, to push the truth away. But lies would only rot them from the inside. "Yes," she said. The Marine exhaled, a harsh, broken sound. But he didn't curse. He didn't blame. He just looked away, jaw clenched, as if swallowing something he couldn't spit out. They didn't speak again. Words were too heavy here. Instead they moved, carefully, methodically, pushing west through the smoke, regrouping with the others. Each corner was another risk, each shadow another possibility of death. She scanned, calculated, and chose, over and over, the weight of her choices pressing down like armor she couldn't remove. When they finally reached the western edge of the village, the gunfire thinned. The insurgents didn't chase far. The ambush had been meant to trap, not pursue. They had already made their statement. You are not safe here. Her team collapsed behind a broken wall, catching their breath, nursing wounds. One man bled from a cut on his temple. Another's arm was grazed. No one was dead. Not yet. Relief should have come. It didn't. Instead, she felt the silence again. That unbearable silence of a place that had known violence long before she arrived. The Marine sat beside her, wiping sweat from his face. For the first time, he looked older than he was, tired, his scarred cheek twitching as if holding back something. "Why do we keep doing this?" he muttered, not to her, not really, but the words hung in the air between them. Every street, every alley, every face, and it's like none of it matters. She wanted to answer, to give him something that would hold, but the truth was she didn't know either. She didn't know why her footsteps kept carrying her into places that swallowed her whole. So she said nothing. But later, when the night had fallen and the stars hung cold above the ruins, she stood alone on the edge of camp. She looked back toward the village, where faint lights flickered in the distance, families still inside, children still trapped. Her chest ached because she had seen their fear, she had seen their warnings, and she had still led fire into their streets. Her rifle hung at her side, heavy. She thought of her father again, of the way he used to tell her that sometimes the hardest work wasn't what you built, but what you refused to destroy. Maybe that's why her hesitation had come. Not weakness, not failure, just a part of her still refusing to be swallowed whole by this endless machine of violence. But would that part of her survive the next day? Or would war finally take it too? She didn't know. She only knew that the silence of that village, and the boy's warning eye, would follow her into every shadow from now on. Why did she stop walking when the road stretched wide and clear ahead? The convoy was moving fast, engines rumbling like tired hearts, headlights cutting through the thin curtain of dust. They had made it out of the valley. The ambush hadn't taken them. Every mile forward was safety, or at least the illusion of it. Yet she slowed her pace until her boots dragged. Something pulled at her. Not the weight of exhaustion, though her body begged for rest, but something quieter. A voice she had carried since childhood. She heard her father again. His voice, low and steady, speaking in the garage all those years ago. "You can't outrun what you leave behind. It follows, always." And now she realized what had been following her. Not just ghosts of targets, not just the hesitation of a single shot. It was the village, the silence, that boy's warning eye. She had brought her team out alive, yes, but she had left something unfinished. The Marine with the scar jogged up beside her. "You slowing down?" His tone was light, but his eyes were not. He had been watching her since the moment of the ambush, watching and waiting. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. "I'll catch up." He frowned. "You're not." But she cut him off with a look. That look she had given rookies in training, the one that ended arguments before they began. He pressed his lips together, nodded once, and jogged back to the others. She turned her rifle over in her hands, feeling the cool steel. She had carried it through every moment of this war, like an extension of her body. Yet in this moment it felt foreign, heavy in a way it had never been before. She thought of laying it down, of walking into that village without it. But then she remembered the faces of her team, the way they had looked to her when everything fell apart. Leadership wasn't an honor, it was a burden, and burdens couldn't be dropped just because they grew heavy. So she kept the rifle, but she also kept her choice. She veered off the road, away from the convoy, toward the village that had gone quiet. The walk back was longer than it should have been. Every step carried a weight of memory, of consequence. The stars burned above her, cold, sharp pinpricks of light that felt too distant to care. Wind stirred dust around her ankles, whispering like old voices. She moved through it all without hesitation. For once, she wasn't second-guessing. By the time she reached the edge of the village, dawn was brushing the horizon. Pale light stretched over the rooftops, washing the ruins in muted gold. The silence still lingered, but it wasn't empty this time. It was expectant. She lowered her weapon, hands loose against the strap. Then she stepped forward. One door opened, slowly, carefully, and then another. Faces appeared, worn, tired, suspicious. The same boy from before peered at her from behind his mother's leg. His wide eyes met hers. No words passed between them. None were needed. She raised her empty hand, palm open, slow, deliberate. A gesture older than war. A gesture that said, "I am not here to take more from you." The boy blinked. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. She stood there as the village breathed again. No bullets, no explosions, just breath, just life. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something else. Something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, fragile, dangerous, necessary. She knew she couldn't erase what had happened here. The ambush, the fire, the fear she had dragged into their streets. But maybe, just maybe, she could leave something behind that wasn't destruction. Behind her in the distance, the convoy rumbled on. Her team would notice her absence soon. They would send for her, maybe even come back. But in this moment she belonged here, not as a soldier, not as a sniper, not as the sum of every shot she had ever taken, but as someone who could still choose. She crouched slowly, setting her rifle down against the wall. The metal kissed stone with a soft clink. Then she sat cross-legged in the dust. Her footsteps had brought her here. They had carved rivers through soil, through silence, through sacrifice. And now, at last, they stopped. The boy stepped closer, tentative, curious. He reached out a small hand, not touching, just hovering near hers. She didn't move, she let him decide. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the street, catching on the dust, turning it golden. For a moment, the ruins looked less like a battlefield and more like something waiting to be rebuilt. She breathed deep, slow. And in that breath, she finally understood. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't fire, it doesn't command. It simply acts. And in the silence that followed, she found her answer. Her footsteps had carved rivers through the dust, but where they ended, life could begin again.